Hello, good morning. There's markedly less people in class today, and there are markedly less people in my son's school classes. I don't actually know if there's something going on this week, but anyway. I'll say this again in about 5 minutes, but I will not physically be here next Monday. The reason I'm not here is I'm attending this. This is called SHB, Security and Human Behavior. Keep in mind, we're talking about the random thing in the first 5 minutes, so this is not vital for anything in this class, but sometimes I feel like professors are some sort of weird walking cloud that no one understands, and it's useful to sometimes understand what we do with our lives. One of the things we do with our lives is profess, expound upon how much we know to other people. This is an invite-only conference, so I feel very touched. It's run by Bruce Schneider, so if anyone is used to seeing his blog. Him and Ross Anderson hold a conference every year in which they just invite all the people they'd like to have a nice chat with. That's his short version of the thing. Unlike a normal conference, if you're used to research papers, there are no research papers at this conference. They just invite you because they'd like to talk to you. And they ask you to list a couple papers you have published elsewhere, which I don't know if those are listed publicly. There's a public, I've been very careful to make sure I didn't open any of the web pages that are not public. Maybe attendees. Yeah, okay, so it lists all of the attendees, and under each one of them it lists some research papers. So for example, apparently I put several things about updating and a little bit about phishing. What's interesting partially about this conference is the breadth. This was what makes this conference so much fun. Normally when I go to a conference, I'm talking to basically other computer scientists. Sometimes I'm talking to psychologists because I do research with human factors. Rarely am I actually talking to some of the people I would normally find here. So some of these are criminologists, some of them are sociologists. I've seen people who are proper philosophers. I have a doctorate in philosophy, a PhD, but I'm not actually a philosopher. So we have sometimes proper philosophers that come to these. It's just a lot of fun. Simpson Garfinkel here. Our fancy thing is not working today. He wrote a couple different books that are actually used. Alessandro Aquisti. It's gonna be bad if I can use my pointer. Alessandro Aquisti. You should really look him up on YouTube. He has some really amazing papers on what's called behavioral economics. So economics studies how we would all behave if we all actually understood how things work. Behavioral economics is how we all behave taking into account our actual biology and tendencies as a person. So this is things like, if I give you a $10 gift card versus actually giving you $10, what does that do to your spending? So he does things like stand in front of malls and hand 50% of the people a gift card and hand the other half a literal $10 bill, and then has his students track him around and see what happens. Kind of fun, some of the stuff he does. What's also nice about this conference, again, you may not be familiar with how conferences function. Everything here is broken up into kind of these sections. And what happens is this section's an hour and a half long, but these speakers are given only about 5 minutes to talk, and most of the talk is a panel. So you can kind of talk to people and really see how. These breaks are also, normal breaks are like maybe 10 minutes at a conference, and these are almost always at least half an hour, which is nice because this is all about just talking to each other. I do not know what will be happening this year. Tragically, Ross Anderson died about a month ago. So half of this conference's main pillar is now gone, and I'm not quite sure what's going to happen. But they normally live blog, and if they do, I'll send out an announcement with a link to the live blog, because for those of you who are really interested in how people use security, this is a really fascinating conference to follow. All right, and that's about 5 minutes on something marginally random. For those who missed the important announcement, I will not be here on Monday because I am at SHB. So what I'm going to be doing, hopefully today, is recording Monday's lecture for you, and then putting it online, and you can all just watch Monday's lecture. This is perhaps actually a mixed blessing, because Monday's lecture is a crash course introduction to networking. Because we're going to finish cryptography today, and then we're going to start in on networking. I know a percentage of you have taken a networking course already, and may consider what I'm saying Monday to be rather dull. So, I have good news. I'm going to pre-record it. You can fast forward the bits you already know. Awesome news. For everyone else, if you don't know networking, there's a pause button. And now you have a lot more time to pause and think about what I will be saying on Monday. And then come next Friday will be the normal schedule. Also, there is coursework due next week. It's up. You should have gotten announcements about this. I'm staring at you guys because Learn always does weird things to me. Actually, I'm going to pause. When I post an announcement on Learn, does it email you? No. Is there any way to make it email you or in some way send a notification?
Unless they opt into it, it doesn't.
Okay, so you can opt into it, but I can't opt you into this. Is there any secret course email list no one's told me about?
There should be a course email list.
Okay.
You can post on Piazza.
Sorry.
You can post on Piazza.
Okay, so Piazza emails you, but Learn doesn't?
Well, you can opt out of Piazza. But there
You
are.
can, okay, you have to opt out of Piazza versus you have to opt in to Learn.
I think Piazza you can still force it.
Force, yeah. You can also force people to get emails if you want to.
Okay, so it sounds like Piazza is preferred as an announcement channel, and I should go ask someone about some mythical email list no one's spoken about.
Okay. The other option is send email regardless of their students there.
On Learn.
No, yeah.
Okay, so there's a send email. I remember seeing that on Piazza. My old university had that same button under Learn, and I couldn't find it here. So I wasn't certain if it was just auto-emailing you. All right. Now that I know that, I will put more effort to making sure you guys actually get email announcements. I thought Learn was emailing you. Okay. Yeah.
For the lecture slides on Learn for cryptography, they apparently locked to us this time.
They did what?
Yeah, they're disabled now.
You can't see them?
Well, we can
You
see
can't
that.
access them.
You can't access them?
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. What is wrong with this system? I put that in there specifically so you guys would know what dates the different modulars were happening. I wasn't doing it to try to lock you out. On a positive note, I happen to have the thing open. I will just frantically fix that. That was not intended. Thank you for telling me. Can someone hit reload and tell me if it's better?
That works.
Awesome. Okay, good. That was not intended, and I apologize. You would think that Learn functions the same at all universities, and you would be wrong. Fun fact, a lot of these things are downloaded by each university, and then each university modifies them. Security-wise, if you look up at the URL, you'll notice it's learn.uwaterloo, which means we host it and change a bunch of stuff. Okay, so, is it better yet? Victory, okay. Hash functions, demonstrating integrity. We ended here in a lot of confusion. So I'm going to try and walk us through that confusion as fast as possible so we get to public-private key cryptography, or public key cryptography, which is honestly how we run a lot of stuff nowadays. This bit was very confusing last time. Let's go back to our examples. On the left, we have plain text. On the right, we have AES 256 encrypted, same thing. All right, just bring it. This is what the frequencies look like for those two bits of text. Again, we're just kind of going over a week. Versus, this is what a hash looks like. So if I take that same plain text, I hash it, I just get that one line. All right, everybody should kind of think this should be obvious, but we're just being very blunt. When you hash something, and we're still talking about normal hashes now, we're not on that slide yet, you get different properties depending on what's happening to your data. So if you have a password, that means that you would expect that password, that hash password, to be living on a protected computer. That hash password is not under any danger of changing. We don't care. We're not worried about an integrity problem, because if somebody has access to the point of being able to change the shadow password file on Linux, they already have a lot of access, and we have a much bigger problem. So usually we don't worry about the integrity of the hashes itself. And the salting that we use is not meant to protect the hash in any way or the message. It's simply used to make sure that no one can reverse it. So on the left, we are concerned about confidentiality. We are not concerned about integrity. Because integrity is being handled by other things. Messages. So when I send messages between devices, I send the message and the hash. Now I'm worried. Because we're now looking at man-in-the-middle attack, right? That hash and the message together are traveling across the internet, at which point they may get modified. I now have an integrity problem. Also, what I'm trying to prove changed. Here, what I care about is confidentiality. Here, what I care about is integrity. The only reason to send a hash with a message is to verify the integrity of the message. All right, everybody's still kind of with me here? Right side, we care about integrity. This is the problem with a normal hash. Let's say I want to say attack at dawn. By the way, the only time we ever use hashes is when our message is stupid, insanely large, and we don't care if it's public. But we're going to use small examples here. So if I type attack at dawn, here's the hash. I send that. My man in the middle just tosses that, does do not attack, and hashes that and sends it to Bob. Bob has no way to know whether this has been modified, because everyone knows how to do a SHA-1 hash or a SHA-256 hash. It's not hard. And even if we kept which hash algorithm we're using secret, if we're still using a public one, Bob just brute forces. He takes attack at dawn, runs it through SHA-1, runs it through SHA-256, just keeps running it until he gets this, knows which one we're using, and then can just swap out the message in the middle. Because there is no shared secret. Hashes can always be done off the text. So like hash at dawn, I think I'm using SHA-256 here. But if you do this, hash SHA-256, I will always get that. This, always get that. There's no keys, because this is a hash. Now my hash is straight up useless, because it's not verifying integrity. Everyone's still with me. More glazed looks, but we're going to try for one first. So, normal hashing won't work in that case. I can't use a hash to get myself integrity because the hash itself might be changed and I can't tell if it's been changed. That's bad. What's the most easy solution to this? Let's add a secret key. So if we add a secret key to our hash, now as long as I and my recipient both know that secret key, we can go and send a hash that can't be modified. Or honestly, it can be modified, but the recipient can tell. So do not use this algorithm. I have posted it here because it is simple and it makes sense, and it's what was confusing everyone on the last slide. There are many better algorithms. Conceptually, they're not too far off. So imagine I take a key, I make a 128-bit key, I snap it in half, and I have two 64-bit keys. I treat one of them with XOR. So I take my message, and I just append my key to the end of the message like it was a salt. Right? So now I just have a slightly different message with the salt stuck on the end. And then I XOR, I do that, and then I just run it through a normal hashing function. And I hash it down to 64 bits. Again, I can just use SHA-1 or something like that. And then I take my second key and I XOR it. So I use my second key to XOR my 64 bits, and I get ciphertext 2. I now send my unencrypted message and ciphertext 2. Because the recipient has key 1 and key 2, they can run the exact same thing on the message text and verifies that the message has not changed in transit. Okay? Everyone still with me? That's what this would look like. This is an attack man in the middle. So what happens? I send attack at dawn. Here's my hash. I'm using key security if anyone wants to do this on their own. Charlie throws away my thing, changes it to do not attack, uses the SHA-1 hash, puts this in here. Bob gets it. It says do not attack, uses the key security, which he knows, does a hash, and say, well, if this was actually the message, then I would expect to see this hash. And I don't. So this is wrong, this is broken. So this is how Bob can determine if the wrong message came through. But this only works if we have a secret key. Back up the slide. The point I was trying to make on Monday, which I think just really caused a lot of damage, is this step right here, where I take my secret key and I XOR it with this other key. This is a one-time pad. Right, because my second key is this length of my message. Now I'm cheating, right? The reason we don't use the one-time pad normally is it has to be the same length as the message. That's huge and really annoying. But if I'm hashing, how big is my message? It's small. Now sending a key across is much easier because it's now a short key. And in fact, I can control the length of the key. I can hash to whatever size I would like to. And so as a side effect, I can now use a one-time pad on the hash with much less cost. Okay, so everyone kind of with me. That means that this method, again, hopefully using a better algorithm, still this method, it has perfect security. We can be certain that assuming the key has not been lost, there is no way back to brute force this hash key. So we have integrity, not confidentiality, because we're sending the message in public, but we have integrity. Just to give you a couple basic examples, imagine election results, for example. I really want the election results from different polling places to be integral. I need them to get between point A and point B and not be changed and be very certain they're the right ones. But election results are public. We post them everywhere. They're announced on TV almost as soon as they're found. So as a side effect, I don't care about confidentiality, but I care a lot about integrity. So there are a lot of situations like this. Another classic example that admittedly doesn't use HMAC because it uses some other things is file downloads. Often you'll see a file and you'll see a hash next to the file. And the intention is that you will be able to then verify whether or not this came out. But that assumes you can get to the web page securely using other cryptography. There's a lot of cases in which I want to know that it's integral, but I do not care if it is confidential. You can also stack these things. So I could go and take my message, hash it using my beautiful one-time pad approach here, and then I encrypt it using maybe something a bit weaker, where I don't care as much, hopefully with a different key. Now I can get both properties, but be sure that if the encryption is broken, I still have the integrity principle. So even if someone can't see the message, they still can't modify it. All of that was me trying to explain this point. Okay. Are we okay with hashes? Because I'm about to move on to public key cryptography, which is a completely different topic. Okay. Up till now, we've been discussing what's called a symmetric cipher. Symmetric means that the same key is used for decrypting and encrypting. So you see this little key here, and we assume that during encryption we use the key, and during decryption we use the same key. This has a huge problem with it that we're just kind of pretending doesn't exist right now, which is how do you make sure both people have the same key? This is a nightmare. This is the big reason we don't use one-time pads, because we would have to do this for every message. Versus if we maybe set up one key in advance, we can use that same key for many messages, which is why we prefer some of the other ciphers. But how do we get the keys? So here's an example from World War II. What they did was they literally wrote one-time pads on pieces of silk, and then after you used a line of the one-time pad, you would actually unravel the silk and throw it away. And this way you knew that no one would be able to get the message, that code for future use, and no one could decrypt something they had captured. This was then sewn into the lining of spies' coats, so that they could have their key as they wandered around. Sometimes you send things via courier. You literally find someone you trust, you hand them a physical copy of the key, they drive it or Pony Express it to the other place, and then you hope you have it. This is all a nightmare. This sort of works in ancient times when everyone was expecting things to be slow, and maybe people started next to each other and then they physically went away. This does not work in the age of computers. In the age of computers, I need to be able to get two people to have a secret key at the same time, and I need no one in the middle to know it. But everyone talks via the internet. So if I can't send the key over the internet, this gets really hard. Enter asymmetric cryptography. So the idea of asymmetric cryptography is quite simple. You have two keys. You have an encryption key and a decryption key. Now that I have two keys, well, actually, I sort of still have a sharing problem, but the idea is, what if I can actually encrypt or create these with two different people, or the two people are talking over an unsafe medium, but somehow they still produce keys that will work together. We'll do encryption and decryption. The answer to this, the way we do this, is something called a trapdoor one-way function. You know how we talk about one-way hashes? They're one way because someone will go and be able to take something, they can take a big piece of text and trivially, with very little effort, produce a hash for it. But the inverse is almost impossible to do. So you need something that's easy to compute, but hard to impossible to reverse. I mean, a vastly simple example of this would be just taking two numbers and multiplying them. Once I multiply two numbers, figuring out from your resulting number what the first two originally were is really hard. Multiplying them is pretty easy, but if I just give you a number that's not prime, how are you supposed to know what two numbers were used to create it? There's a small set if it's a little number, but the bigger it gets, this can be complicated. That's a very basic example. In order to go and create a key, shared keys between two people, what we need is a trapdoor function. So we need something that is really easy to compute in one direction and really hard to compute in another. Preferentially something where it can be computed on one side using small facts, and I'll show you how that's done. There are a very large number of symmetric encryption standards. We talked about some of them, but the number you can make here is almost infinite. Think of your own special way of mixing everything up, and that's another one. There are very few public key ones, because in order to create a public key one, you need a function that's like this, and there are not many. This is why you see almost everybody using the same ones, because there's just not many options. So this is, I was trying to figure out if this was public-private key cryptography or not, but we'll say yes. This is Diffie-Hellman key exchange. So we're going to start with the easy stuff. This, by the way, is used a lot. So in a Diffie-Hellman key exchange, the idea is, the point of this is not to encrypt anything. Diffie-Hellman will encrypt nothing. All it does is it makes sure that both people have the same key. It's kind of why I mean it's not necessarily public key encryption. What's public about it is that two people are communicating across a public channel. So they're talking where everyone can see what they're saying, but they still are able to jointly construct the exact same key at the end. And once you have the exact same key, you can use all the symmetric in cryptography. This is how a lot of modern encryption is done. We use something like Diffie-Hellman, we come up with a shared key. We might even, in every single conversation, come up with a different shared key. And then preferentially throw it away so that no one can ever decrypt our stuff. The idea here is I'm sorry, we're going to start getting prime numbers and multiplicatives and things like that. I will do my best to explain this. I do not expect anyone to be able to drive this, but I do expect you to understand the high-level concept behind it. So the idea here is we use a multiplicative group of integers, modular p, where p is a prime and g is a primitive root of modular p. So I stole this off of Wikipedia because it was nicer. So imagine we have the number 3 is a primary root modular 7. So here's 3 taken to every number short of 7, right? So 3 to the first, 3 to the second, 3 to the third, 3 to the fourth, 3 to the fifth, 3 to the sixth. If we compute those, and then we do the mod 7, we suspiciously get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So this is a magic number combination where I have all 6 options there and all 6 options here. This is vaguely making sense. So what Alice and Bob are going to do is they start by computing just in agreement. They create P and G. P and G need to be these sorts of numbers. They need to have these properties in advance. Picking one is not that hard. Generating them can be challenging. Once they've got them, they each select a number on their own side. It doesn't matter what this number is. It's ideally random, but it does need to come from this set. So ideally, we have picked a P and G that are large. We are not doing that for this example for everyone's sanity, but hopefully these are big numbers, such that this random set is large. So what happens is that Alice computes using this information from a combination of this and this. So she is taking 5 to the 4th, which is her number. I didn't want to do 5 because this table would be enormous, but imagine just taking the base number you've agreed on to the 4th, so she's now in one of the rows, and that allows her to compute a number here. Bob does the same thing, but with his number. So now Bob, she has 4, Bob has 10. 4 and 10 are impossible to work backwards, so you can't take 10, 23, and 5 and produce 3. So because they've been multiplied together and moduled, it's impossible to take those combinations and reproduce Bob's number. Because Bob is about to send 10 across the public internet. Alice then takes Bob's 10 and puts it to the 4th, which is her number that she came up with here. Mod 23, which is the one they agreed on, and she produces 18. Bob does the exact same thing, right? He takes Alice's 4 that she produced. She gave him, takes 4 to the 3rd. 3rd being Bob's number, modular 23, which they agreed, and also produces 18. Okay, there's a lot of mods and things here, but the point is, if you follow this, you will always end up with the same number. But using only the information that crosses the internet, you can't easily compute that number, and you can't easily compute the secret numbers that Alice and Bob have both created here. This is Diffie-Hellman key exchange. It was invented all the way back in 1976. A lot of these early stuff, several different people invented it at the same time because communication takes forever. And because the places that were most working on cryptography are places like the NSA, GCHQ, these organizations that are disinclined to talk to other people. So they will sometimes invent something internally, and then an academic a few years later will invent the same thing. This is attributed to Diffie and Hellman, but it was also invented in 1969, I think inside the GCHQ, maybe? Anyway. Again, I don't expect you to drive this, but we're understanding how this is working across the internet. We're using a lot of math. And the key here are these kind of fun words like multiplicative groups. So you're looking at this sort of a setup with these properties. So you need a lot of numbers like this. And if it ever turns out that you can go backwards, if someone finds a way to do it, this is all dead. This only works because there's an easy way to produce a number that when combined with another number will produce the same number at the end. This is used a lot. What's nice about this is you can compute a different key every single time. It produces something called forward secrecy. So if you look at something like WhatsApp, they go on about how wonderful they are in terms of forward secrecy. Forward secrecy means that I generate this key. In theory, only the two of us have this key. And then usually on my behalf, after we're finished having the conversation, my computer deletes the key. And hopefully Alice deletes the key. So if you imagine the NSA sitting in the middle here, watching all this conversation go past and recording everything, then they might wait for a little while and maybe break into your computer and steal some keys out. And even if you've deleted your communication, the NSA still has all the communication you sent. So if they can steal some keys off your computer, they can decrypt the old stuff. The nice part about Diffie-Hellman is because we create new keys all the time, and hopefully throw them away as soon as we don't use them anymore, then there's nothing for someone to take off of your computer in order to do this sort of breaking. So something like WhatsApp, assuming you delete your own messages, big statement, is forward secret because it's deleting the keys, and now no one can decrypt the messages that were captured. All right, as everyone wants to this Diffie-Hellman. I only have one slide on it, but it's actually a quite important algorithm to use a lot and allows us to do a lot of security properties. All right, so this one, the computation is asymmetric, but the resulting key is symmetric. So you use the key, you go and do, you can then use it for all your symmetric cryptography. Yay, wonderful. Symmetric cryptography is great. We have a couple lectures on it. But what's even more fun is if you can use two keys, two completely different keys. This is asymmetric cryptography. Asymmetric cryptography is one of those things that my field's founded on because it confuses people so badly. So before I talk about how it's done at all, we're going to pull up to the level of little pretty pictures, and we're going to explain how asymmetric public key cryptography is done, irregardless of the algorithm. So when we talked about symmetric, it was really easy. You take your key, you take your message, you put them together, usually it's using some math, and you get a cryptography out. Great. What do you do when you have two keys? Well, with two keys, we are trying to go and we have to manage two keys. This is a slide that is just trying to point out the things we're trying to do. So we're going to use two keys, but those keys are going to give us different properties. So the first property we're looking for is confidentiality and integrity. So we want to know that the communication between you and the other party is confidential and has not been changed. So it's confidentiality and integrity. We're going to start there. The second property we want, which we can also get this way, is knowing who you're communicating with, which is authenticity. So we're going to start with confidentiality and integrity and we'll hit authenticity. Okay, so public-private key cryptography, you generate two keys that are paired. So these keys are generated together and they're meant to be used together. Whatever one key encrypts, other key can decrypt. Public keys are given out to everybody. You post them. This is my old one that's now expired. But anyway, this is my public key, where it was. Private keys are kept private. Don't give them to anybody. It's vitally important that they are secret in this. If you'd like the math, here's the basic statement, and it's basically if you have a plain text message, I encrypt using my public key, the plain text message, which then can be decrypted using the private key, creating a plain text message. So K private, key private can encrypt, and B public can decrypt. The inverse is also true. K public can encrypt, and then K private can decrypt. I've just flipped the two. We talk about them as public and private, but really they're just, they undo each other. We name them this way because we don't want you to accidentally publish your private key. It's just pound it into your head. Don't publish this thing because everything is based on no one else knowing it at all. And then obviously the opposite. We're going to do this with pictures because I'm trying to pound this into your head. So imagine I want to send a message to Bob that no one else can read. I encrypt this message using Bob's public key. So I have Bob's public key because everyone has Bob's public key. He's posted it as publicly as possible. And then I send it to Bob, and Bob uses his private key, which only he has, to decrypt it. If I encrypt with his public key and he tries to decrypt with his public key, we get an error, because these things can only undo each other. So if you try to apply one of them twice, you'll just get nonsense. You have to go and use a public key to encrypt and a private key to decrypt. All right. So if we do this correctly, great. This gives me my first property here. I get this because it's confidential, we've encrypted it, and it's integral. It's integral because I encrypted it with the public key. Oh no, drag. It's not integral yet. I put the slides early. Well, you know it hasn't been, sorry. Okay, it's integral under a certain definition. It's integral in that it has not necessarily been changed since whoever sent it. But we don't know who sent it. Which is bad because the man in the middle could have sent it. But it hasn't been changed in transit. So, from whoever did send it. Big problem we have here is Bob has no idea who this message is from. So Bob's public key is known by everyone. So Alice can go in and encrypt it using the public key, send it to Bob. Bob uses his private key to decrypt it. Great. What about confidentiality here? Can anyone see what a potential issue with confidentiality in this is as well? If I wanted to brute force this, would it work? So if I know what you're sending, I can actually see whether or not you sent it. Everyone's using the same key. So if I think you just sent attack at dawn, I can test that. There's no randomness in this. Now, brute forcing all possible combinations is not going to work. The space is too enormous. But if I have any ability to guess what you're sending, I can verify whether or not that's what you sent. So you have confidentiality here, but it is not as perfect as we would necessarily like. And we have this potential problem, right? Bob cannot differentiate between Alice sending this and Eve sending this. Because there's no, other than Alice's maybe email address, there's nothing showing who sent this. So Eve could send it using Bob's public key and send it to Bob, and Bob can still decrypt it, which is awesome. We've got confidentiality, but we have no authenticity. And we also don't have any integrity. Because we have integrity, but without authenticity, that's kind of bad. Because there's no way to differentiate between these two situations. But we do have confidentiality. That's good. We like confidentiality. It's also bad because this is possible. Because we don't know where the key is coming from, it's possible that Alice thinks she's talking to Bob, but is actually talking to Eve. Eve goes and takes this and just throws it away. Or worse, Eve actually goes and tells Alice, oh, I'm totally Bob. I'm Bob. Here's Bob's public key. I swear this is Bob's public key. And then Alice encrypts with Bob's public key, which is actually Eve's. Eve is able to decrypt it because Eve has Eve's private key. And then then Eve takes Bob's public key, encrypts it, and sends it to Bob and says, this is totally from Alice. This is where we start getting more scary man in the middle of times. Just checking the slide I've got. This totally happens. So, this is an example from Mexico. The FBI, I'm sure it's the FBI, went and raided a bunch of drug cartels. They took them down. The reason they were able to take them down is they were able to listen to all of their messaging. Now, drug cartels would really like to not be captured, and so they actually hired someone to set up proper encryption messaging amongst all of their devices. And they did have proper encryption set. The problem was, that a high-ranking drug trafficker kept forgetting his password. I couldn't log into his system. And so he couldn't use the encryption, and instead called over in the clear, the system administrator, and started complaining about how awful this password was. I want you to kind of imagine being the poor system administrator on the resulting end of this, because we're talking about Mexican drug cartels. These people shoot other people on a regular basis. And they're saying things like, it's all your fault. Why can't you do this? How come this password, look at this, how awful this password is. It has symbols and things. Mexican drug cartel person who has a lot to lose. I cannot manage a password with symbols and things. And as a side effect, he did this in the clear. The FBI took one look at this and said, wow, I bet this system administrator would really love to move to a different country right now. Oh look, I have their phone number. Contacted this person and said, look, if you just switch some encryption keys out for us, we will totally put you somewhere safe. And he did. And so suddenly all the encryption keys changed on their entire messaging system to ones the FBI owned. This is exactly the situation I just showed you. And the FBI got to listen into every single message sent by this drug cartel. That in the middle of attacks happened. I have some other examples for you. All right. That is how I get confidentiality. But as I've just mentioned several times, I don't know whose keys who. People can say anything they want on the internet. You just post whatever. So how do I go out and show that the message is from me? So you all should be thinking to yourself, wow, Cami, at the beginning there you were talking about you can go both directions with these keys, but suspiciously we've only been going in one direction thus far. This is when we flip the directionality. Now we care about integrity. I want to show that this is from me. That's only possible to come from this key. So what I do is I do what's called a signature. I take my private key and I encrypt the message. I send it to Bob, and Bob decrypts it using my public key. Now there's a huge confidentiality hole in the middle of what I just presented because everyone has my public key. So if I go and I encrypt it with my private key, anyone can read it. Everyone can read it. But they know it came from me because the only key that's capable of encrypting this is mine. So if it decrypts using my public key, then it is definitely from me. And so now we get integrity. And there's an obvious thing we can do here. Let's take my private key and encrypt it. This gives me integrity. And then I take Bob's public key and I encrypt it again. And now I've got confidentiality. So I actually use both keys when signing. I sign it and then I encrypt it. And then I send it to Bob, who does the reverse. So Bob's the only one with Bob's private key. So Bob goes and decrypts it, because he can do that. He's got my public key, because everyone's got my public key. And so he's able to show that this is actually him. All right, is this making sense? We're going to test if it makes sense, sorry. Okay, testing if this makes sense. Think, pair, share, so we're going to do 1 minute quiet, but when I'm both encrypting and signing a message, does the order of the encryption and the signature matter? And why? All right, quiet for 1 minute. Okay, that is at a very high level. And what we have now done is we've got the first property. We've got integrity, we've got confidentiality. The authenticity is still a bit dodgy, so if you have a really good way of making sure that he is actually from Bob, then you've got authenticity. So if you, for example, Bob walks over to you and explicitly hands you a USB drive with his key on it, we're good, we got authenticity. If you pulled that key off of a public key store where anyone can post anything they feel like, authenticity is a bit shaky. Because anyone could claim they are Bob without being Bob. I will come back to number 2 in a moment. But let's talk about number 1 and how it's actually done. All right, again, we're moving kind of back in history. I wrote down when the knapsack cryptography came up with. I think it's the early 70s. Yeah, I think this is from the early 70s. Almost no one uses this because it's somewhat older, but it is much easier to explain than RSA, and I can actually do a work example. So we're going to do knapsack first, and then we're going to talk about RSA, and I'm not going to work out RSA because I don't want to kill me or you. So we talked about a trapdoor function. We want something that's easy to compute but hard to reverse. NP hard problems are great for this. Because they're NP hard, we know that they're, especially if we can mathematically prove that they are NP hard, that's even better. The knapsack problem is an NP hard problem. I don't know what they teach at this university. Has anyone heard of the knapsack problem before? Oh, okay, great. This actually, I've never heard of it before I started digging into this. I always got taught things like the traveling salesman problem, which is a fairly similar concept. For those who don't know, just to make sure everyone's on the same page, the idea is that you have a set of weights and a desired sum, S, and you want to find basically the set of weights that will sum to S. At a small scale, this isn't too hard. At a big scale, it's a major issue. But the nice feature about this is that the way we indicate the weights is we use these A values, which are binary. So we basically create AW, A1, W1, also AN, W. So for example, so this is really hard to solve. This is an NP hard problem. But there's an exception. If your knapsack is a super increasing knapsack, where each weight is greater than the sum of all prior weights, it's an easy problem to solve. Now it's trivial. Now what I do is I take whatever my number is, let's say it's 300. Well, okay, and 300 may not possibly go off this, I grabbed a random number, but basically I pick the biggest number that's smaller than mine, I mark a 1 there, I subtract and then I can just go down. And I will always be able to tell whether or not I can get that sum. And I can do it in effectively linear time, at least in regards to the size of the knapsack. That means I now have something that is easy to compute, but NP hard. Awesome, this is what we build encryption on. All right, so what we do to do this, and this is using, again, this is public key. So we're trying to create a public and a private key. And we want to be able to send things across the internet. We want one to invert the other. So I create a super increasing knapsack. It doesn't really matter. It only matters that it is super increasing. This is my private key. And I select a multiplier and a modulus 91. How those are selected is a bit complicated, but I select those two. The combination of that initial knapsack and those two values, that is my private key. I don't share those with anyone. And I use them to generate a generic knapsack, one that is not super increasing. That's very important. And the way I do it is this little table on the side here. So what I do is I take my values. So the first value is 2, 3, 7, so you can kind of see those along the side. I multiply them against my multiplier, which is 41. They're all multiplied by 41, and modular 491. And I create these values. They are not super increasing. That means the knapsack on the right, the generic one, is NP hard to solve. Okay. That one on the right, that's my public key. I also have to compute the multiplicative inverse of the conversion factor. If you don't understand this sentence, that's okay. It involves more math. But the basic point is that I can take my private key and those numbers I picked, and I can compute this 12. We're going to need 12 in a minute. 12 is also secret. We don't share 12. We only share this public key. And like I just showed you, we share it with everyone. Now, if I want to encrypt something for Bob, Alice is on the left, Bob is on the right. So Alice wants to send this binary value. The way she does it is she takes Bob's public key and she lines up the values. So here we have Bob's public key, which is a set of values, right? In order matters. And then I put the binary below it, and then I just, every place there's a 1, I pull the number through, and I add them up. So I will get 548, because the number 1 is next to 82, so I use that. The number 1 is next to 83, I use that. Okay. Now I have this number, this set. I add them together, I get 548. I now have a knapsack problem, right? Because here is the knapsack, the public key is the knapsack, and this value down here, 548, that's S. So if I want to get the message back, what do I have to do? I have to solve the NP hard problem of getting a summation off of this knapsack. Okay, at this size, not an issue, but at scale, NP hard. So I send this value, 548, or Alice does. Okay. Now the knapsack and that value are fully public, but again, we're protected by this NP hard problem. So Bob then computes, it basically inverses this. So he takes that magic 12 number that we had earlier, dot product with 548, mod that number we were again using earlier, and gets 193. All right, this is where the magic math is happening that's doing the inversion. Now, what Bob needs to solve is 193 against this knapsack. Can anyone tell me what the correct answer is that he'll get back out? Or, I guess we just did a think, pair, share, so I'm not going to make you guys do another one. I'll just pull up the answer. So in order to do this, Bob takes 193. This is too big, so he subtracts 120. That's 1, 57, and then 0. And then if you just add these numbers back together, you'll get 193. So now Bob knows that Alice's message is 100101110. Okay, is everyone still with me? There's some scary math in the middle to make sure this actually functions, but conceptually you can see how now there are two different keys that are being used to encrypt and decrypt the same thing. They can't be inverted. So you can't, if you were to apply this public key twice, you would not get the message. You have to use the private key to decrypt or vice versa. All right. Don't use the knapsack solution. It is actually NP hard. I guess if you scaled it to a big enough number size, you would probably still be secure. But it's generally speaking been broken a couple times. It is nowhere near as bad as XORing something. This will actually protect something for a while. But with modern computers and modern sizes of computers, this just isn't going to do it. However, what I just shown you conceptually is quite similar to how things like RSA are done. They're just done it with different math and a harder scale. So RSA was invented by S. Schmier and Alderman. S. Schmier, I just found a picture of him on Wikipedia, so I put it on there. This is a modern standard. RSA is used in a lot of different places. It's a very common one to use. You'll probably see it out. What's kind of scary about it is, unlike knapsack problem, it is not based on an NP hard problem. It's based on prime factorization, which I do know is not proven to be NP hard, but a lot of people have worked really hard to break it, and they still haven't succeeded. So we're kind of assuming that since no one succeeded, this is a suitably hard problem, and we keep using it, even though it hasn't been proven to be NP hard. I'm not going to get into the details of this. I'm just going to walk you through what it actually does. We're not doing an example. So to generate, you need to choose two large prime numbers, P and Q, and form their product. So PQ gets N to you choose E, which is relative to prime to the product. So you get, I feel like I skipped steps. You choose E, which is relative to the prime to the product, and you also create D. I think this is supposed to be bullet pointed in. And then your public key is N and E, and your private key is D. I compute the cipher by taking my message M to the E, mod N, and that is created. So your cipher here is just basically a big number. What's binary? A big number. So I just go and take whatever my message is, convert it to binary, treat that binary as if it was a number, and take that number to the E, mod N. To decrypt it, I take my ciphertext and put it to the D, mod N. This works assuming all this is true. And if you would like to pull up from Wikipedia or many textbooks, they will work out the mathematical logic for you that says that this is true. But conceptually, this is very similar to the knapsack problem, right, where I'm going on basically, this creates two keys based on this information. So N and E and D, and they will invert each other. And this creates public key cryptography. I'm going to pause here. This is public key cryptography. I really do want to get through the next bit, so I'm going to go through the next bit kind of faster, but it is less math heavy. All of this has left a massive hole still as a problem. We still assume we know which person goes with which key. We still do it old standard. We can like hand them off to each other physically, but this is not going to scale. And this is not going to scale in a day of modern computers. This is still a nearly unsolvable problem. It has been solved, but it is solved using a lot of trust as opposed to solved in any way mathematically. It's also one of the founding problems in my field. Key sharing via email, by the way, is you see studies on it constantly, and I've yet to ever see one of them be effective. So let's think of a couple of ways we could try to do this, maybe where we use a little bit of trust. So one of them is we have humans do the linking to identify the cryptographic keys. Yeah, so this does scale poorly. So I have to validate every single, let's say web pages, right? Maybe web pages are using private key cryptography to send stuff back and forth, they kind of are. And I have to hand verify, I have to go to the headquarters of every single company I'm going to visit. It's not going to scale, and it just gets worse. This won't work. By the way, even though it doesn't work, most apps have it sitting underneath. So if you pull open Signal or WhatsApp, both of them will let you compare your key with someone else. So you can actually do key verification with most apps. Most people don't do it, but you can. Maybe what we'll do is we'll just post the keys publicly. Everybody's got a website. Let's just put our key on our own website. Now what we can do for verifying is we just copy this key down and basically say, okay, the key I've got on my hard drive, does that match the key on the website? Conceptually, this works if you're really, really, really certain that the connection between you and that website are secure. Now we've got a chicken and egg problem, because how do you know if it's secure if we don't have their key? You don't. Also, people screw up. This is Adobe, that thing that does all the PDFs on your computers. This is their private key. They have fixed this since then, but you know, humans make mistakes. Don't do that. So that's a nice idea, but how do you find a place that guarantees be from us without using cryptography? Super hard. Idea 2, what if everyone did a few verifications? So now instead of expecting everyone to verify everyone, let's just verify a couple people, right? There's this whole idea of 6 degrees of separation, right? Within 6 people, you can map yourself to anyone else on the planet. Great, let's do this. So let's have Alice verify Bob's key, Bob verify Charlie's key, so Alice can now trust Charlie. Or take a deep breath and really ask yourself how much you trust the person sitting next to you to verify a key of the length I have been showing you. This is a top-level university. Now I want you to imagine a coffee shop near your house, and that same question. Yeah, anyway, this is something called Web of Trust. This does exist. If you go onto public key repositories, they will actually have signatures, especially for people who are really determined. But not necessarily. There's also these things called a key signing party. This is something you totally go to if you're a geek, but most other people do not. Yeah, this does not scale, and most people do a really bad job of it. Idea 3. Let's get a bunch of really trusted groups. Let's just pick a couple people we trust to do these verifications, and we'll have them do it. And then they can have all the high standards, and everyone else can just trust them. This is WhatsApp, by the way. How many of you have ever verified a key on WhatsApp? What are you doing instead? You're trusting WhatsApp to do all the key verification for you. Okay. This is something called the certificate authority. So now the idea is we have a large set of groups that can do verification. What you see here is a screenshot probably from Firefox. I like Firefox. But a certificate authority verifies this key, and then they sign it. And that signature is, we call it a certificate when it comes from one of these large organizations. The signature usually also comes with other information in it that we wouldn't necessarily get from a normal signature. So they're basically adding the facts on, and then they sign the public key of the organization that they're verifying. If you go onto any website that has encryption, that is properly encrypted, HTTPS, anything that has HTTPS, you can use your browser to see these. You can see who attested that this website is real. This is me doing this on Firefox a couple of years ago. Firefox still has a lock icon. For Chrome, I think you're just stuck with some sort of information thing you have to click and then go down and find security and then progress downward. But what you can see here is that this is Ally. You're securely connected because this is HTTPS. This is who they are. They paid for a higher level of verification, so it includes their name, their address. And this is who verified them. They were verified by Entrust. Actually, if you go into encrypted connections, you can find a lot of information. You can view the certificates, you can see who it's actually from, you can see kind of how it was encrypted. Just opening your browser, you can discover a lot of information. But now don't we just have the same problem again? Because now we need a list of everyone who's one of those massive trusted groups. And if we're only talking about, say, one organization, we can handle this. But we're talking worldwide here. What's the first thing a large government like an agency like the NSA does? I'm a certificate authority. I totally will sign things and verify them for other people. You should add me to a trusted list. Totally trust me. I will not in any way say that this website is a bank when it's actually the NSA. Okay, we have some problems here. So how does a browser, or really anything else, which your operating system also has, know which authorities to trust? And clearly they sometimes don't. Because I'm making fun of my prior university here, by the way. A lot of the internal pages are not properly done with certificate authorities. Okay. So sometimes it's actually not secure. You open these up and they're just not signed. What's happened is that no one has verified who this is. So this one's a bit easier to understand because if you actually open it up, it explicitly says that this website does not supply ownership information. So it's basically saying everything here is encrypted, we have confidentiality, but we can't do authenticity because they have done what's called a self-sign. And you can see that by just pulling up and see that actually there is no, the University of Edinburgh says that this is the correct server, but there is nothing going up to a proper authority. Your operating system, your browser, a whole bunch of other things maintain these lists, and they decide what is and is not a proper authority. And they sometimes have wars with each other. So Symantec got caught signing certificates for non-entities. So basically what happened, Google repeatedly spotted semantic signing keys. Basically, I think this was Microsoft that happened before. Some entity that was definitely not Microsoft had a key published as being Microsoft, which is bad. And this ballooned to 30,000 issued certificates that are invalid, that are not actually from the actual company. They're not doing the valid verification. And as a side effect, Google inside their browser said, we don't trust semantic anymore, and pitched all the semantic certificate authorities, causing everybody who's verified by semantic to suddenly show up as not verified on Chrome. This happens. There's another example from GoGo. This is, if you go on an airplane, you can sometimes pay money and then you can get access to the internet. Adrienne Porter-Felt went and paid money to get access to the internet and suspiciously found that YouTube.com, she works for Google, is not showing up as properly secure. And when she dug into the certificate, she found that there's this organization that this Google.com is owned by Google, but the issuer was GoGo, which is the online Wi-Fi provider, instead of being Google itself. So what has happened is that GoGo has signed a certificate stating that their key is actually Google, which is not, and then it's man-in-the-middle all traffic going back and forth on the airplane. These attacks happen in real life. All right, I'm going to wrap up. Man-in-the-middle attacks are security. We have public and private key cryptography as one way to solve this. Semantic cryptography is one way to solve this. Key sharing, and I really encourage you to actually open up your web browsers occasionally and just see this stuff. It's just sitting there for you to look at. You can go and see what these trust pieces actually are. All right, just to reiterate again, I will not be here on Monday. Showing up to this room on Monday will result in mostly an empty room. I recommend instead going online. I will try and use Piazza now that I know to announce that the video is up when it's up. I will be here on Friday. So do come back on Friday, next Friday. We're talking about networking next. And for those of you who are sad that we're now finished with cryptography, we're going to probably keep running into cryptography. It happens a lot throughout security, but you should now have a strong base. All right, thank you very much. You're free to go.